Hi, this is KSQD 90.7 Weekly Cutting Edge. I'm your host, Galina Hale, Professor of Economics at UCSC and Faculty Director at the Institute for Social Transformation. My guest today is Michael Beck, who is the Director of the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience and AXA Chair in Coastal Resilience at UCSC. He was the lead marine scientist at the Nature Conservancy for 20 years before joining UC Santa Cruz. He collaborates with many agencies and companies, including the World Bank, U.S. Army Corps, FEMA, AXA, and many reinsurance firms. He has authored more than 100 papers and numerous op-eds in major newspapers, including LA Times and New York Times. You might have seen his articles. He has been a Fulbright Fellow and a Pew Marine Fellow, and I'm very happy and very proud to also call him my friend and a co-author. Welcome, Mike.
Happy to be here, Galena.
So I'm very excited to talk to you about what is our common interest, which is nature-based adaptation solutions to climate change. But before we get there, can you talk a little bit about your career path? How did you come to UCSC, and what did you do before at the Nature Conservancy?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. I've been actually based at UC Santa Cruz for a little over 25 years. When I first started with the Nature Conservancy, I was based in San Francisco. I had interviewed for positions here at the university, really liked the folks who worked here, and I was interested in being based somewhere outside of a downtown business district, as I was. And I came to UCSC and said, "Hey, I work for the Nature Conservancy. I'd love to be able to figure out a relationship where we might be able to work together." And Gary Griggs, at the time, the director of the Institute of Marine Sciences, where I'm still based, made it as easy as possible for a partner to be based here. I've been here most of the 20 years that I was with the Nature Conservancy. There, as you noted, I led the global marine team. At the time that I first started, which was in 1998, in the Conservancy was strictly a land buying organization. They were not convinced at all they were going to do marine work. And a lot of the time, I had to have on my cheerleader outfit that basically said, "Rah, rah, you actually can do marine work, and here's how we would do it if we were going to do it at very large scales." And I still remember when I came in, I'd come from a background that was very experimental, marine ecology. We would work in the Rocky Intertidal and we would set up these replicated experiments on these plots that were, less than a meter squared, and we had whole bunches of them. But I was very familiar with very tight statistical methods at the time, and I came in and I was the one marine scientist there for the US, and they said, "Hey, could you develop a plan this year for conservation across the then Gulf of Mexico?" So, well, that's certainly a different scale than I'm used to working on. But I was happy to do it, and that just in a nutshell kind of encapsulates the kind of very different nature of the problems that I was suddenly thrust into, and has been the basis of my work all along, an interest in a wide variety of problems at scales that can really have impact for people, property, and nature.
So can I ask you, I think for just like the Nature Conservancy, I've always been a big fan and supporter of the Nature Conservancy. For those who don't know, their traditional approach was instead of advocating for protecting the land, they would just go ahead and buy the land and protect it, which I think is extremely effective as an economist. I'd say, well, that's a foolproof. Um, but I think most people would agree, well, we need to protect land. So why do we also need to protect marine ecosystems?
Well, in the first instance, as you've probably heard many times, more than 70% of the Earth is the oceans. We can't really do a credible job protecting the Earth if we're not protecting the oceans. That's to start. The oceans are also some of the greatest sources of the diversity on this planet, and that includes places where I used to work, including the Coral Triangle there in the Indo-West Pacific, encompassing portions of Indonesia and other countries. Immense and incredible diversity, as well as extremely fundamental to the functioning of our planet. The heat trapping power of the oceans is one of the main reasons why we're still here, in addition to the oxygen that it provides.
Well, that gets to the questions that you're studying now. But how did you become marine biologist? Like, what was motivating you when you were studying in college and afterwards?
Well, I went to school at the University of Virginia, and back in the time, mid 80s, dating myself a little. I was a pre-med student, and I looked around at all the other pre-med students, and I thought, this isn't exactly who I am at all. And I took an ecology course from a professor at the time, and it felt like a revelation to me. I was like, oh my goodness, I get to work outside a lot of the time, not so much anymore in the work that we do. But I get to work outside, understanding the natural world and thinking about how we do something to all the impacts that we see. And that really motivated a career working both on terrestrial, but mainly on marine plants, animals. And I'm also a very habitats focused person. And by habitats, I mean I look at coral reefs, oyster reefs, mangrove forests, salt marsh
Mhm.
wetlands around here, our kelp forests. I really believe that the structural habitats in marine environments really provide the basis for the interactions that we see, at least near shore.
So I also know you're a surfer. So which came first, your passion for the shoreline or the surf?
My passion for the shoreline and the water, I was as I said, I first started some of this work at UVA. I'd always lived around the water prior to that, but I was up in the mountains for my undergrad and master's degree. I actually finally moved to Dauphin Island, which is in Alabama on the Gulf Coast, and realized how much I was missing the sea. And I, at least in the
Mhm.
Gulf, started boogie boarding. I did a postdoc at University of Sydney. For some reason, was still boogie boarding even then. And it was only when I moved back to the States and my son was a year old, and I thought, if I don't get standing up and surfing, he's going to cream me out there. So I've been surfing for a little over 25 years as well.
So when you started, working for the Nature Conservancy, you said at UCSC as well. Was there coastal campus already there, or did the coastal campus came later?
Well, the coastal campus was here, in as much
Mhm.
as even at that time, which was, let's just call it more or less 2000, there was the barns and the trailers were the main areas for the researchers. The Seymour Center had just recently been stood up, but the building I'm in now is the Ocean Health Building, and that wasn't completed. And so I
Mhm.
spent my first 3 years on campus in, well, let's be honest, a grotty old trailer at the base of the redwoods, deep, deep, deep in campus, just waiting for this building to be finished. And I was literally standing there with my box of papers as the first person to move in to the building, more or less.
Oh, cool. Well, the trailers are still there right next to E2 before the trails start. I don't know who is in them, but the trailers are the most
Oh,
permanent structures.
the one I was in definitely is not still there.
All right. Okay, good to know. Okay, so the first time we met, I basically learned from you about the nature-based solutions. And I think for most people, it's still kind of mystery and mainstream. And why are we talking about that? If I talk about fire, people think about the materials that they need to use for building home and clearing out the vegetation. So that, I guess, is a nature-based solution, but it's kind of like, altering the nature. And then when people think about flood, they think about seawalls and, wave breakers or whatever. I'm not an engineer. So if, first of all, can you explain a little bit what it is and why it's important? And also, like, people think about planting trees as like a nature-based mitigation solution because trees sequester CO2, right?
Yep.
So what are we talking about here? What do you talk about in your research? And also, if you can indicate for non-technical audience, what's the good resource to read? And you can send me a link and I can then add it to our IST archive page. So if there is a link to something that people can read, I can include there.
Great. Yeah. Well, let me first back up one second. I'll talk very directly about the work that I do as research with our team here. But maybe let me first back up to the highest level. Say something about the center that I direct. So, the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience was stood up just a little over 3 years ago with a significant investment from the state of California. Within the center, we've supported more than 100 projects across campus, and that includes all divisions, many departments, from arts to engineering, many different kinds of projects with a real focus on all aspects of climate change, but some particular aspect on adaptation, which recognizes that climate change is no longer a problem of the future. It's here, it's now. We're facing it, and we need to help people adapt. So we focus a bit on mitigation, which is reducing future climate impacts, but we really focus a lot on adaptation. And then within adaptation, we have nature-based solutions, social justice, and communications and visualization. Those three components are incredibly important for understanding and helping to reduce the risks that people are facing now, people and nature are facing now from climate change. And we can come back and talk a little bit more about the kinds of things that we do there. Within the center, the team and the lab that I've directed for quite some time here, both between the Nature Conservancy and now with my AXA chair hat on, does focus a lot on coastal resilience. And so what we do as a team is we assess coastal risks, particularly flood risks, but also erosion risks. So how bad are those to people and nature from storms and sea level rise? Next, we value the benefits of nature, like reefs and wetlands, and that's coral reefs, oyster reefs, our rocky reefs offshore here, our mangroves, our salt marshes, and others. We value the benefits of those habitats for, in a way, standing in the way of that flooding to protect people. And by being able to put an economic and a social value on the benefits of that protection from these habitats, we can then, third, look for incentives for reducing, for being able to invest in these habitats for reducing risks to people and property. And those incentives can span the range from insurance for habitats to changing how we think about our infrastructure as an asset. We can cover some more pieces of that. But in the main, we're trying to bring engineering and economic principles together with ecology to be able to understand just how critical those habitats are in protecting us from the impacts of the sea. And so that's in a nutshell what we do.
So to be a little more concrete, can you talk about, our Santa Cruz coast here? We had not one, but two piers destroyed by storms, the major flooding in Capitola, major erosion of the West Cliff Drive. It seems to be constantly under repair. So What can be done? And do you have any projects that are specific to California and Central California coast?
Yeah. So we do as a center, we have many projects that we're doing throughout the Central Coast and California, in addition to our work beyond the state, which recognizes that we in the state here have impacts in our lives and livelihoods that impact many people. For example, in projects that we work on in the Caribbean, where those countries and those people, those communities that have done the least to contribute to climate change often feel the greatest impact. So I want to make clear that we have responsibility beyond just California, but here more locally, we work with the Community Action Board in Pajaro. We work with farmers as professors like Andy Fisher work on groundwater recharge, ways to
Mhm.
essentially turn back the groundwater meter. But on the coast, and specifically for the lab and team that I co-lead with Borja Reguero, an associate professor here, we've also been looking at how to help California coastal communities adapt. And we look at both hard solutions, like seawalls and where they may be effective, but what their costs may actually be. And we look for more nature-based solutions. That includes wetlands in San Francisco Bay, and here on our coast in Santa Cruz, dunes as an important feature, as well as if and how we can work with our offshore rocky reefs.
Mhm.
We sit here on these shorelines and we see the power of reefs protecting us. The reason that there's great surf here is because those rocky reefs are breaking that wave energy before it hits our coastline. And there may be ways, and we're showing with some of our engineering tools, how we might be able to work with nature before we have to do more extreme strategies like moving people away from the coast.
So in the rocky reefs, they're being destroyed, so they need to be rebuilt. And how would you go about that? You need to send dive. How do you drop like old concrete? Like what do you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's start by, I mean, more than 20 years ago, when I was with the Nature Conservancy, we started projects with oyster reefs. So they're
Hmm.
one of the first reefs. And basically, an oyster reef has a limestone hard bottom that's basically concrete
Hmm.
on which that they've secreted, on which you then have living shells. And so
Right.
when we lost those surfaces, we put some limestone in, usually artificial, and then got oysters to grow on top of them. And with coral reefs, we're doing exactly the same thing, using some engineered structures and trying to get corals on top of them. Here, with our rocky reefs, it's less that we're losing some of that height in reefs. That loss of height is, in fact, what's happening with oyster reefs and coral reefs. But we are actually seeing a relative loss in height. That is, as sea levels rise,
Right.
we are, in essence, losing the height of our rocky reef protections. And then when you put that with greater waves as well, that means water can more easily smash into, erode, and flood our coastlines. So, we're taking some of the same principles and concepts from over 20 years of oyster reef work and 10 years of coral reef work and applying that to
Mhm.
these rocky reef ecosystems, how we can help them to grow with sea level rise and increasing waves. And then importantly, how we can then make sure that the biological communities like the kelps, in as much as possible, resemble some of those near shore rocky reef kelp and algal habitats. So applying the short, and sorry to be a little long-winded there, but the short is applying the same principles for reefs, whether it's oyster reefs, coral reefs, or rocky
Mhm.
reefs, here to protect our coastlines.
So changing maybe the pace a little bit. So you work full time, 100% of your time on issues related to biodiversity, nature, climate change. all these things are being really threatened right now. Can we talk about feelings? Like, how do you feel about that? How do you keep going and maintain your, joyful attitude and optimism? Do you have optimism?
Well, you can't get into conservation, period, unless you have some belief that we can change. Most of the people who I work with in conservation are generally optimistic, if very realistic, and a little all too aware of the impacts that we see. I am by my nature optimistic. There's also a part of this that I know from the kind of work that we do on these habitats in so many places that if you give nature half a chance, it's incredibly resilient. We can get it to grow back if we just create some of the conditions and then maybe seed it a little bit. It will grow, it will return. So I'm very optimistic about those aspects. And in fact, many of the times when people talk to me about, oh, all the impacts that I see to habitats, and aren't I worried that coral reefs are going to disappear? All I hear about is the disappearance of corals. I go, in the end, there's still going to be corals here. I'm not so sure about us. That is, I'm quite worried about our resilience as communities and peoples and the changes that are going to happen to us more rapidly. I do believe, corals will change the locations in which they grow. They'll grow kind of further north or south, depending upon the water temperatures and the like. And it'll take a while to get back reefs in full. But the impacts to people who want to stay rooted in place, well, that could be a very much different story. Um, I hear from people all the time that aren't I worried about what's going to happen to corals and coral reefs because they hear on the news that corals are dying everywhere. And I say, yes, I am concerned about corals, but I'm also very convinced that corals, in one way, shape, or form, are going to be able to survive. And I'm a bit less optimistic about people. That is, are we going to be able to survive these impacts to climate change? Corals are going to move. They may move north or south, depending upon water temperatures and the like. People who are used to being rooted in place, I don't know. These changes are going to be much harder on us than they are likely going to be on nature, at least in the long term.
So can you give us some examples of where maybe in any of your projects the nature was able to regrow and reclaim its space and its
Yep.
habitat? Yeah.
Well, I'll start because I say both myself and the Nature Conservancy and some of the wider restoration community, at least coastally, has done as much for oysters as anything. I wrote a paper. The first one might have been almost 20 years ago now that noted that oyster reefs were the single most impacted marine ecosystem on Earth. There were in most places, just a few percent of natural oyster reef habitat remaining. So we're talking about places like Chesapeake Bay, which used to be dominated by we did about 4 or 5 years of that. And then able to discover that we were able to start doing football field size projects and then miles of projects that could also offer coastal protection. And in restoring these miles of projects, you then were able to reduce the waves and the impacts to the marshes that couldn't grow behind these habitats in the past because they
Mhm,
weren't there
mhm.
breaking the waves. And so suddenly you were getting both oyster reefs and then the marshes rebuilding back behind them. You really can, if you give these critters have a chance, they're going to rebuild.
That's fascinating. So I think a lot of people really do care about nature and they really care about the survival of our species and other species. What can our listeners do? Is there something they can do in everyday's life? They cannot go replant oyster reefs, or maybe they can.
In fact, we have lots of volunteer efforts. I'll say, kind of partly put on. I still do a lot of work in cooperation with the Nature Conservancy. They and other organizations do, in fact, involve a lot of volunteers for habitat restoration efforts. So that's one way to get involved. There are other ways as we seek changes in policies that would really invest in nature and not just human-built structures. For
Mhm.
example, after storm events. So after habitats and our artificial structures get destroyed, we've only usually provided money to restore the human-built infrastructures, not these natural infrastructures, which are also providing protections. You can get involved in letter writing campaigns for a variety of things. That includes those. There's always beach cleanups. Those are pretty important for removing some of the trash that is both an eyesore for beach-going public as well as for benefiting nature as well. So those are just a few of the opportunities.
Yeah, I have a rule every time I go to the beach, which I do a lot because I commute along Highway 1. I have a rule to pick up at least one piece of trash. It's usually plastic, and it's never a challenge. It's always very easy to find one piece of trash to pick up and take away from the beach. And there's always stuff washing up from
Yep.
Monterey Bay
The
as well. It's not all just people polluting here.
No, no, no. And the other important thing, I used to serve on the board of Save Our Shores, and
Mm,
they and we had done a lot of beach cleanups, and we also recognized that one of the really important places, and this is not just here in the central coast of California, it's almost anywhere that we look, that doing some watershed cleanups,
hmm.
particularly along stream sides. That's a huge source of what ends up in our waters and in the bay, particularly in a place like here on the Central Coast, where our watersheds basically extend just up to the crest of the Santa Cruz Mountains here for the most part, and anything along that stretch is going to end up pretty quickly in the bay here. So you can do things like that to help.
Yeah, don't throw your trash in San Lorenzo River. It's going to end up on your
Absolutely.
beach.
Exactly.
All right. I think that's all the time we had. So thank you so much, Mike, for your time and all the work that you're doing.
Yep. Real pleasure to speak with you, Galena. Have a great day.
You too. This has been Cutting Edge at KSQD 90.7. I'm Galina Hale. Goodbye.